Hi there, it's Tony again, and we're back on the bench, and we got a special session here this evening with these two Penn Jigmasters, and the reason why I've laid out both of these is because I wanted to point out that these two reels are pretty much the same reel, but they are different generations. We'll zoom in on this one here first, real quick. This is the Penn 500, and this is the first generation of the Jigmaster. They only made these for about a year. I think the first year, you can see here on the tail plate that it's just a blank tail plate. There's nothing on it. But you can tell that's the first generation because of this sticker stamp that they put on here. Whereas if you look at this Pen 500, they changed it to doing stamps on the plates themselves, in opposed to that sticker. And you can also tell that the coloring has changed a little bit as well. And they also put some writing on this tailplate here. There are quite a few different versions of this reel. It's actually still in production today. Um, but they're not made out of quite as good components and parts anymore, unfortunately, as they once were, like when these were made. But essentially, we want to disassemble both of these, and I got new parts for them over here. New drag washers and whatnot. And so, we're gonna basically take both of them apart. But for the purpose of this video, I'm going to put this one aside for right now, and we're just primarily going to be focusing on this older model here. So the good thing about these reels, this particular model, is that it's the take-apart design with that screw knob there, and you can basically get into the whole side of this reel by taking that apart. And as you can see, um, this doesn't look too bad on the inside, but it does have some signs of a little bit of rust in there, maybe some pretty dirty grease and whatnot. So obviously, cleaning is definitely going to be necessary. But functionality wise, this reel is in pretty good shape. This was another eBay purchase of mine that I got for a relatively cheap price. And I definitely wanted to pick it up, mainly because it had this first generation sticker on it. These are a little more rare, harder to come by. Um, and so we're just going to get into this, and we're going to start disassembling this right away so that we can clean it up and work on it. And hopefully it will become a nice showpiece reel, which is pretty much what my intention will be for it. This other Jigmaster that I have here, I've had this for quite a few years, and I've used it for a lot of striper fishing, from the shore and whatnot, and it's a great solid reel. And it's definitely been around for a long time. They started making this model, I believe, in the late 50s, if I recall correctly. And it's been around a really long time, so it's pretty clear that it's a popular reel. The more modern ones have black tail plates on them. But structure wise, they're pretty much the same. They're just made with cheaper metals now and cheaper components. So if you're in the market for one of these, I would definitely recommend seeking out one of the older generation ones where they're made in the USA, um, and try to avoid one that's you know uh, rusted or corroded, if at all possible. So we we've got our tailplate side off here, and I'm kind of contemplating whether or not to take the ring off. I really don't think it's necessary. Um, you know, this really doesn't look that bad, and I am going to clean up some of these chrome pieces, but I do have replacement parts for some of these. For these post frames and stuff like that. I purchased new ones. Unfortunately, you can't get them in the polished chrome anymore. You can only get them in the brushed stainless steel, but that's not the end of the world. It'll still look good. Same thing with the stand mount. It's kind of a similar idea there. Either way, it'll take care of all of those pieces there. Now, one thing to note while we're here is to see this clicker here. You can tell that it is kind of rounded a little bit. It's definitely been around the block a time or two. It's not the end of the world or nothing like that. It'll still work fine. But it's good just to point that out at least. And I don't really feel that this ring really needs to come off. It just basically needs to be cleaned. So I think I'm just going to leave it on there instead of trying to hassle with getting into this seam here. It's just a little bit more work that I don't think we really need to do right now. So I'm just going to put that aside, and we're just going to continue on here. And I like to sort out all these parts and get them into little trays or bins like so, just so that I know where everything came from. And as far as this ring is concerned, the ring itself is not too bad, but like we said, these frame posts are in pretty bad shape, and being that we want this to be a classy, showy type reel, we definitely want to get rid of all the corroded, rusted parts as much as we possibly can. So I'm just going to continue on here and take all these frame posts off. And eventually I'm just going to be, throwing all of these old pieces into a box that I have, that's loaded with this kind of stuff. And, to somebody like myself, most of it isn't worth much anymore. But, to somebody that's just looking to restore, the functionality of, some of their reels or something like that, some of that stuff is somewhat valuable. Take this handle off. The handle is actually in pretty decent shape, considering the age of the reel. It doesn't have too much pitting damage on it. It's got some signs of wear in there, but it's not bad. So I might swap this out with a different handle. I've got a couple of different handles that'll fit this, that are a little cleaner than this perhaps. That's something I'll have to kind of ponder over a little bit while I'm doing this. But I figured I'll work on both of these Model 500s, just because of the sheer parts that are involved. The drag washers are the same, dog springs, all that stuff is all the same on these reels, on this model, so it just kind of makes sense to knock them out back to back. I've got a whole box of project reels that are waiting to be worked on, like these. And a good trick to do here sometimes when you're trying to get these old handles off is just to turn the star drag so that it pushes it out. If you turn it counterclockwise like that, and it'll just push out like that, then that way you're not jostling it and risking bending it and things like that. Got that sleeve that comes out there. So now we're pretty much at the point where we are prepared to take out our bridge mechanism and the main gear and all the innards that are in here. And we'll be in pretty good shape. And I'm also going to grab another little tray here, a little magnet tray for this, and just going to put all these pieces in here because there are quite a few little pieces, and you want to make sure that you keep them all where you can find them. Irregardless if you're replacing them or not, you want to see what came from where. And I do have my schematic, of course, for this model to my left here, and I will be looking at that, but you know, just for the sake of taking all this apart, you just want to have all these trays close by. So you should be able to roll your drag and your main gear out. And you know, this reel is really not in too bad a shape, but it definitely has not been lubed up in a while or cleaned or anything like that, probably for at least a good 40 plus years, I'm guessing, just by the looks of a lot of this stuff. But you can see here what this looks like. You've got your main gear, and your drag washers are inside the whole main gear there, and you've got the dog spring right down here in this area with the dog, and that does your clicking as you turn the bridge sleeve. So we're basically going to pull out these components here. And there's also a fiber washer that's under here, and I did get a replacement washer for that because normally that should just always be replaced when you're redoing all of this stuff. But yeah, you've got a spring tension washer in there, and then you've got a series of metal washers and either fiber washers or for this reel it's more than likely a leather washer, which is right here. And just by feeling this, yeah, it just broke on me right here because these washers are so old, and that's exactly why all this stuff should be changed out. If there is any remote intention of using the reel, granted, I probably will not use this reel, but you know, someday if it you know goes to my daughter, my son, or something like that, and they decide that they want to use it, well, it'd be good to have a good fresh washer kit in there. So you can see that you know that's what these innards look like with all those drags, all those washers. And you know, the main gear isn't too bad, but it definitely needs cleaning and whatnot, so we will be doing that in time, as well as the inside of the bridge. You know, there's a lot of grease and stuff that's caught up in there, probably due to over greasing and over lubing and whatnot, which is a pretty common thing. But basically, that's all those parts, and I'm just gonna stack all these back up and throw them in here for now. And then the rest is the pinion gear and the eccentric lever mechanism here, and there's a couple of springs down in here, and we're just gonna pull some of this stuff out. And sometimes you kind of have to rock these pieces around a little bit and jiggle them a little bit to get where you need to be to get these out, but they will come out with a little bit of work. These parts are actually a little hard to move around the way that they are, just because some of this grease is so hardened and thickened that it's pretty hard to move some of these pieces here. Once you get some of these pieces loose, they all kind of come apart just like that. And you've got some springs in there, and you've got this eccentric lever part here, and you just want to be careful that you don't jam it on any of the plastic or anything like that, but eventually you should, in theory, be able to take this out of this little slot here. And as you can see, it doesn't come super quickly necessarily, but just don't give into it and keep working at it. Eventually you'll get it. Kind of doing a little roll around trick here, and it actually looks like this has been a little compromised at one time. I can see some little signs of this being kind of worked in there pretty hard. I'm not exactly sure why that is. I don't know the history of this reel, so that's definitely something that I will need to be looking at. But what we can do is we can take this eccentric lever off. As soon as I get the right tool on it, just for the purposes of cleaning all of these parts and whatnot. And that usually on this takes 11/30 seconds nut driver to take that piece off, and then that handle comes off there, and then all of these pieces will come out accordingly, along with this part of that lever mechanism. So you got all those pieces there, and then this plate side is all done pretty much, and the only thing that's left is the bearing on this side, which usually takes a slightly larger nut driver. It's usually 3/8 for a lot of these conventionals that Penn makes. Not all of them, but for a good portion of these. So there's that there. And I'm going to get another little tray here and dump all these little pieces into here so that I don't lose any of that stuff. Lots of little pieces to deal with here. So there you have that. So in a nutshell, that's where that's at, and that's the whole disassembly of the Penn Jigmaster Model 500, and basically we're going to spend some time cleaning up all these parts. A little bit of WD-40 goes a long way for cleaning a lot of the metal parts. And then we're going to be getting into, replacing our chrome pieces, such as these, and then, our drag washers and fiber washers, all those parts. And I also did get some screws because some of these screw heads looked pretty rusted to me. Once again, I don't know the history of this reel. And so, you know, we're going to essentially aim to make it as brand new as possible. And hopefully it'll come out quite nicely. This is Tony with back on the bench, and we will see you in the next video, which will be the reassembly of this. I'm not going to do a video of all the cleaning really that's involved in this, but the next video will be the reassembly, and we'll see how this turns out. We'll see you next time. Hi there, it's Tony again, and we're back on the bench, ready to reassemble this vintage first generation Penn Model 500. And I spent quite a bit of time cleaning a lot of the innards up. There was quite a bit of grease, so you know, using some Q-tips and some WD-40, you know, or some degreaser, some various different things to clean up all the excess grease, and everything really does go a long way. There were some chrome pieces that I wanted to kind of shine up a little bit, chrome pieces that I'm using from the original build of the reel. But then there's also other pieces like these frame posts that I'm going to be replacing the old ones here with these newer ones. And there is a little bit of a difference in terms of their thickness, but they're threaded the same. And these are the new ones are brushed stainless steel, whereas the old ones were polished chrome. But as you can see, it's very corroded and pitted. And so I just went ahead and bought some of these parts, a new stand mount that's nice and shiny, and opposed to what was there. Things like that. So we're going to get back into the assembly of this, and now that this is all cleaned up in here and it looks pretty decent, we should be ready to start going back in and assembling. What I like to do here is just kind of do another quick inspection and make sure that, you know, you got all the grit and the dirt out of there, which it looks like we do. Um, I did get a new bearing also for this side, and we're going to take some of our blue grease, our Penn grease, and we're going to put a dab of that on there. And I also like to exercise using a little bit of lube or 3-in-1 oil on the threads for all the threads on these reels. The lube is good because it's not overly thin. We're going to put this new bearing in here like so. We don't have to cinch it in really tight right now at the moment, but you know, just to get it in there. And then I do like to put a little bit of lube on that clicker, and this clicker's definitely been used a time or two, so it's good to get a little bit of grease on that part there. So now we're going to start putting in our frame posts and also our stand mount. We'll actually start with the stand mount, and there are 2 shorter screws, and I did order new screws as well because a lot of the old ones were they were pitted and corroded pretty heavily, and you know, we're trying to make this reel look as nice as it can possibly be. So we're going to start with putting on this stand mount, and this is a little tricky at first. You basically just need to get, you know, a screw started, and as you can see, it takes a little bit of work sometimes to get that happening. And positioning is really kind of key to making this come together the way that it should. that snugged up there. And once you get a couple of these in, then everything else kind of goes together real easily at that point. So go like so. There's that one there. And we'll just keep going in sequence. As I mentioned in the last video, I've actually got two of these reels. I've got this first generation one and a slightly newer generation one, and I will be rebuilding that one as well, but for the purposes of this video, I just wanted to focus on this older one, this older generation, and get it back to a nice state that is going to be, visually pleasing, as well as mechanically, as well, for the chance that it could get used. The Jigmasters are great reels, of course. They've been around, and everyone knows of their reputation that does serious saltwater fishing and whatnot. So spin those on there, and we can cinch up these screws a little bit. I wouldn't do too much of it just yet, but I like to get this side of the reel done, just so you can kind of see that a good chunk of it right there is done, and we're ready to put on our plastic spool. And these reels did come with the option of either plastic spools or metal spools, and later on eventually aluminum spools, and they're all good, depending on what your applications are. I prefer the plastic spool if you're really getting into some serious casting. The only downside to the plastic spools is that they can get brittle over time, and they might actually crack on you at a certain point. So you do want to be mindful of that. So there's that. And as you can see, a good chunk of the reel is actually done. So we're going to keep pressing on, and we're going to work on the handle side now. And there's quite a few components, of course, to the handle side, and we're going to actually begin with this ring, which is part of the handle side, but it actually mates to this part of the reel, so to speak, with these small screws that we have over here, and they're very specific screws. There are these little flat heads here, and they're specific lengths, and so we're going to get these all laid out here, and this is because of the take apart design that you have this the way that this is. So we're going to do a little bead of lube here on all these frame post threads. I'll take care of that, and then we're going to get this into position. Like I said, I did spend a lot of time actually cleaning this up. It was very loaded with old grease. Didn't really appear like it had been cleaned up that much regularly at all, especially judging from all the corrosion and stuff that was on a lot of the parts. Lucky for me, the rings were salvageable. Otherwise, I would have had to try to seek out new rings. And some of these parts are, they're not totally impossible to come by, but they are harder to come by, some of them, or they're just simply expensive. And you know, um, when you're working on these things, sometimes cost, does play a factor as to how much you decide you're actually going to do with the reel. I'm just going to turn this sideways so you can see better how this works, but once these get lined up, it'll be pretty self-explanatory. But yeah, the take apart designs are really cool if you're a surf fisherman and you want to change out spools real easily. That's what these were designed for. Penn has a small number of the take aparts, such as the Jigmaster. The Squidder, of course, is a legendary take apart design, and the Silver Beach, the '99 Silver Beach, is also another take apart piece, quite a bit more rare than the Jigmasters or the Squidders, but it is a take apart design. We're just gonna continue on with all these screws and get them into position, and we're going to get our tiny bead screws down here, and cinch those up a hair. To the stand, and that should be good. And we're just going to snug these up a little bit just to get this all kind of lined up properly. Okay. So we're going to set that aside now for the time being, and we're going to push on with this part and on the handle side. Now, basically, we have our bridge, which I did spend quite a bit of time cleaning, and I also managed to lose the little baby dog spring here. And as you can see, that is a really, really, really small piece of metal, and it actually went flying off on me, which does have a tendency to happen. So I do luckily have a new one, and we're gonna put this on, and these can be really, really tricky sometimes. To put on, just because it's such a tiny, thin piece of metal, and it's real easy to mess these up actually, and it's not uncommon for these to go flying or to get broken, just because of how small they are. So I'm just going to ever so slightly try to get this on here and spin it and cinch it back in like so, and hopefully this will take care of that issue there. And as you can see, that's roughly what it's supposed to do. It does look like it's a little crooked, so we're going to try to sort that out a little bit, just so it's not so crooked. When you're dealing with these dog springs, they can be quite irritating sometimes, dealing with them. So we're gonna try to just get this just in the right spot that we want it in. And as you can see, that snaps real nicely as it's supposed to. So we're going to run with that. Now, as far as the main gear is concerned, I'm going to zoom in on this here real quickly. There was actually some signs of rust damage in there, which is a little unfortunate, but we cleaned it up the best that we could. But the fiber washer that was in there, I guess, kind of held in a lot of that rust, and so we're going to put on a new plastic fiber washer on there, and then put on our main drag like so. And then of course we have our old brass washers here, keyed washer, and just the regular brass washers, and we're going to eliminate the old leather washers that were there. And I'm just going to wipe these off a little bit from some of the grease that was on there. You know, these look pretty decent for the most part. They don't really have any real issues other than the fact that they're just old. But then we're going to take 3 new fresh carbon fiber washers for our new drag kit here that I ordered, and we're going to go in sequence, and of course we will incorporate our cowl's grease, and you can take a Q-tip or a little paintbrush or whatever it is that you have kicking around and just put a little bit of that on there, and I'm just gonna do that. And then on our fiber washers, of course, goes a long way doing that. And then I think I actually skipped an important part. I think I forgot to actually put the fiber washer that goes in first. Always want to make sure you have the schematic right next to you when you're doing this, because it's important to get it right. So it's fiber first, and then metal, and then another fiber, and then your keyed washer. It's got the 2 little nipples on it, and then your last fiber washer, like that, and then your final metal washer goes on top, like so. And that's pretty standard for most of these conventional reel drag kits, of course. And then you've got a tension washer that goes on the end of that, and we're going to put that on there, and our drag assembly is ready to go. We're going to put this aside for now, and everything else that we have here is pretty much in the eccentric lever department, and the pinion gear, and the bearing, of course. So we will start with that and put that back into place. Snug that up a little bit. So you have that, and then there's a few different pieces and components in here that we need to get in place again, such as the eccentric lever. This piece has this spring here that you got to get just in the right position, and it snaps in on this one side here. As you can see, it likes to kind of fall out once you start pressing that down in there. And this is where a pair of long-nosed needle pliers kind of comes in handy sometimes, and just to kind of work that spring into this groove right here is good. And then of course the tricky part is actually getting this in a position where you can put this lever on. And sometimes what I do is I turn it upside down and then pull it like that, and then get it upright, so you've got it like that, so you can put the nut in place. And again, don't forget to apply some lube on your threads. Just a little bead is all you need. You don't need a lot, just enough to just to wet that thread a little bit, ever so slightly. Take your nut driver, turn that down a little bit, and make sure you got your finger on that lever while you're snugging that up. And as you can see, that is all good. So there's that piece. Got your pinion gear. Goes on like so on that little bar there. You got two springs. Go here, and as soon as I can find that other spring, wherever it went, under there, like that. And then you have this mechanism here, which you do need to get in place. So punch down on those springs with your pinion gear, like so. And then you put your arm on top of all of this, basically. And sometimes you got to work that eccentric lever kind of back and forth, and it can be a little tricky sometimes doing this, but once it gets into place, it'll snap right in pretty much, and like so. So that's really all you need to do there. And then once you have that in place, you can just leave that alone for the time being, and then you're ready to put this in. But once we apply a little bit of grease on our drag here, or our main gear, you definitely want to keep it off of the drag washers, so don't get really carried away, but you do need to apply a certain amount of grease to this. Keep it in those teeth, and we're just gonna ever so slightly spin this around here, and for the most part that should be pretty good. Just gonna do a little bit more on there. This blue grease is great. Definitely recommend using this for, you know, all this kind of application. So at this point we are prepared to put our gear set in, and you need to press down on those springs and insert your gear set. And then this is the special part where you turn your bridge around so that you can put your screws, your set screws in, like that. And it should come out looking something like that. And then you've got 2 screws for the top and 2 screws for the bottom. Don't forget the ones that have the shorter thread always go on the top. And we're gonna just hit these with a tiny little bead, and we're gonna work those screws in, and get a bottom screw in as well. And at this point in the process, what I do is I like to just turn this and make sure that you've got a good solid dog sound in there, which it sounds like we definitely do. So we're gonna continue on now that we've verified that that's all working right. And got your other top screw, and looks like I've got a slight little alignment issue, which does have a tendency to happen. Sometimes just loosening up the other screws will do the trick. And get this bottom one in here. I think that's probably going to be pretty good. I'll try to get this top one in here. But this I recently did a pair of Jigmasters, rebuilt two of them for a friend of mine, and they were the newer generation. They were still made in America, but you know, so it's kind of good to get on a roll of doing the same model sometimes. Now, another thing I like to do here is I do like to take a little bit more of the blue grease, and I like to put just a little dab in here, in these areas here, just a little bit, because you know, these moving parts definitely need that in there. And another little trick that I like to do sometimes is take a little bit of lube just to this little crevice that's under the eccentric lever roller, basically, because it just kind of helps, you know, move this back and forth, so to speak. But I like to work all those components in there, and we're just going to finish snugging this up, and we should be pretty good to go. So that's pretty nice and solid there. And we'll just take a tad more grease here and just put it right there as well. So that's ultimately what that should look like. And this is ready to go on this side of the reel now. And you have to get this set just right, and then you hear that click, and then you should be able to turn your knob here, and you're good to go. And that's already feeling pretty nice, especially with that new drag and everything, and all the stuff that we're doing here. So that's going to be pretty cool. So now we've got a sleeve that goes in there. And once again, don't forget your lube on those threads, just a little bit there. And I'm just going to get some of this grease off of my hands here real quick. And got our star drag, of course. And gonna roll that on there. And at this point, this is the original handle. This is another handle that I have. I think I'm going to put this new one on. This one's really not in that bad a shape, but it does have a little bit of pitting on it. This one here is just a little bit better shape in terms of its cosmetics, and I think that'll be very appropriate for this reel. All of these first generation Jigmasters that I've seen are pretty much this lighter handle color, either a you know, a tan beige or a yellowish marble color, kind of the way that this one is. And this one is actually very pretty, and you can actually see some of the, you know, some of the transparency in there, so that's quite nice. Yeah, I think we're gonna just run with this handle here once I get this just shined up just a little bit more. But put that on there like so. And then your course, for the handle. A little bead of lube. And we're just gonna snug this up. Take your wrench. And want to make sure that it's you know, just right. And then sometimes you gotta cheat the nut back off just a hair, which we will. And another bead of lube on that little bead of a screw that we're gonna put in there. Cinch that down. And in theory, that's pretty much it. So we're gonna make sure that clicker's still working, which it sounds pretty strong, and got good free spool, it looks like, in there, and snug up the drag, and yeah, it's definitely working. So yeah, that's ready for a monster, I think. So there you have it. First generation Penn Jigmaster 500, rebuilt and ready to go. So this is Tony with Back on the Bench, and we'll see you next time.